as we go through them. I just want to take a very brief minute to elaborate on something that Tom said regarding one of the items that the city had proposed and was rejected by E&B, and that is the issue of whether they would agree to expiration of the lease should the ballot measure fail. When we had that conversation recently, it led to a question that was made to me, which was, well, if E&B doesn't agree to that, how long would the lease last if the measure failed? And so Mr. Mills and I both took a look at that question, and we both came across a California case that suggests that if the measure fails, the lease would expire in 2027, which is the 35 years from its inception in 1992, so that it would not simply go on indefinitely, but would come to an end on its own terms. And since that question was raised during the negotiations, I thought it would be of general interest to the City Council, and so I just wanted to bring that to your attention before you get into some of the other issues. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so
we could,
then,
yeah, maybe just on page 3 of the staff report, and again, I would encourage the subcommittee to chime in or take the lead, but we can just
Can I ask a question
walk
about
through
that?
the staff report.
Can I ask a question of, just to clarify what you just said about the lease agreement? Because it sounds pretty significant. So am I understanding this correctly? If the voters say yes to drilling, then the lease only goes for another 13 years?
No. What I said was if the voters say no, then the lease will expire in 2027. If the voters say yes, the settlement agreement contemplates that there is additional time. There is a stipulation in the settlement agreement that we are roughly a year into the primary term, and if the voters say yes and ultimately a drilling permit is issued, the settlement agreement provides that at that point the clock starts to run. If the clock starts to run at that point, there would be roughly 34 years left on the lease for the oil company to drill.
So the vote effectively has like a renewal of the 35 years? Because you're not starting at the 1992 year?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Okay, so if the voters say no, it's going to expire in 12 years.
That is the conclusion that we reached, both Mr. Mills and myself, yeah.
Okay, and if the voters say yes, it's not 12 years, it's going to be 35 years. So there, inherently, we are basically extending the 12-year period.
Right, roughly 34 years. Right, so it's an interesting situation, one of a number of unique situations where we have an agreement that has arguably two different expiration dates depending upon what the voters decide.
So do we have a duty to put on the ballot something that extends the life of the lease? Because that's where I'm...
Yes, you have a duty to put this on the ballot by virtue of your settlement agreement.
So put something on that extends the time so they have the entire 35 years.
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks.
And then lastly, on the issue of the termination of the lease, just so everybody's aware, the information that was shared by the city attorney is news to me as well, so I haven't heard that one before. So obviously it's good information to share, so I appreciate the input. But it raises an issue in my mind is whether or not that specific issue should also be addressed in the ballot measure. So if our voters should be provided the opportunity in the decision-making process that if you're choosing yes for this project goes on for 35 years and here's a potential public benefit that you get, but if you vote no, that lease essentially expires in 14 years, and this is the benefit that you will get out of that as well. This is obviously news to me, so I'm saying this thinking out loud about it. But if it is a decision that our city attorneys are comfortable with, Whether or not we should include that, and obviously we need to let the voters know, but where that information gets put into the ballot measure and the development agreement, since it was just raised today for the first time, I'd like to have that discussion with my colleagues as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Council. Nikki Carlson, Council for E&B. A couple of thoughts. Did want to respond to the City Attorney's comment about the term of the lease, despite the City Attorney's considered opinion that it would expire in 2027. We don't agree with that. In fact, the whole concept of having two expiration dates, we don't think kind of works with the settlement agreement. Settlement agreement, at a minimum, has the expiration of the term, 33 or 34 years out from whenever, I believe the timing is, when we are ready to receive our first drilling permit. So we think at a minimum that is the term of the agreement. I don't know that we need to necessarily debate that here tonight or any time in the future. Let's see how the vote goes, right? Let's see how the vote goes, and we can go from there and maybe decide that then. A couple of other things.
I think the term expiration of the lease is interesting because we got like a whole new litigation item up for bid. I mean, this is, I don't know how many of these are going to come up between now and March, and I laugh about it it's a serious issue, it really is, but I have to laugh about it because I just feel like this won't be the last, and I know how this works. Oil company has their attorney, and her job is to get the best possible terms. I know how that works, so I have to think at some point, and maybe next time when we figure out what, if any, impact that might have, or what, if anything, is mentioned about that in the development agreement.